Welcome to the It's Your Story to Tell podcast, where brave people share how they overcame tough times to inspire others in what's possible. I am your host today, Hannah Chijioke-Davis. I am the founder of the Agora Wellness Center and one of the coaches here at the It's Your Story to Tell Coach Collective. Welcome to our podcast. On today's episode, we are getting to meet an incredible woman. I met LaSandra on social media some years back. I believe we were in a widows group that we had both joined, right? We had a lot of similarities in our grief stories, both of us losing our husbands very suddenly and being left with young kiddos and having to figure all of the things out. But on a lighter note, I saw that LaSandra and I shared some more common issues. Both of us were from the Midwest, on the south side of Chicago. So that was a fun note. Go Bears, go White Sox. Right? But joking aside, I have seen LaSandra share just so vulnerably over these past years and choosing to turn her grief journey into a walk of grace and strength. And she has used her story to be such a blessing to others who are struggling. And I just cannot wait to have her share her story with our community today. So, LaSandra Hutchinson is a speaker, social justice advocate, and the founder and CEO of Grace and Grief. After 20 years of friendship and 13 years of marriage, LaSandra experienced the sudden loss of her husband in October of 2017. At the time, their children were 11, 10, 8, and 6 years old. Eager to learn all she could about grief and how to rebuild a powerful life, she began researching grief and sharing her grief journey through social media posts. The impact and demand for more content led to her founding Grace and Grief. It's an organization that creates hope-filled community, content, and events for those who've experienced grief and loss. So, LaSandra, welcome today to our podcast. I am so excited that you agreed to come and share with us. So happy to have you.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for having me. Thank you for asking me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. All right. So let's kind of dive right into your story. Can you kind of share that personal journey that, eventually led you to founding Grace and Grief, but kind of your history, kind of your background, and then how your experience with loss kind of influenced this endeavor?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like you mentioned, I grew up on the south side of Chicago. My parents are from Chicago, and in high school, I had this really funny kid start sitting behind me in every class. And I didn't realize he was sitting behind me initially, but eventually I realized, like, oh, he sits behind me for whatever reason in every single class that we're in. And I didn't mention it to him that I realized this, but I kind of just pondered it and was like tickled in my heart. And I thought that's kind of endearing. And so
Oh.
he was sitting behind me. He was really funny. So he was cracking jokes. He was talking about the teacher. He was like saying like silly things and just had me cracking up all the time. And we just became quick friends. And from the outside, it looked like we were really different. Like I was like a cheerleader and kind of like with the popular kids. And he was a little bit more of like a loner, really, really super smart
Mm-hmm.
and like at the top of the class. And so we seemed really different, but we started talking on the phone and we would stay up all night, like talking about everything from music to movies, his crazy uncle, my crazy uncle, our mothers, our father, everything. And just became quick friends. And we also would talk about our faith, talk about our plans for the future, our career goals, our aspirations, how we wanted to impact the world, really.
Mm-hmm.
And our we shared a love for social justice and a desire to help really like marginalized communities and to build up marginalized communities. So that just had us join at the hip, and we started being partners on school projects together, going to the library together, just kind of like if you saw him, you saw me. So that was high school. When it got to going to college, I convinced him to come to the same college as me. So we both went to Northwestern University in
Ah,
Illinois
yeah.
and ended up having the same major. Like we had a lot of the same interests. So we both majored in social policy. We studied abroad together in Ghana, West Africa. Like we just did all the
Oh,
things.
wow. Yeah. That's
Yeah,
so
it was
cool.
just so cool and became a part of a campus ministry there. And just like our lives were transformed, really, even in our faith went to a whole nother level while we were in college as well. And I would say that was really the time where we learned how to really pray and like how to spend time with God, for
Mhm.
ourselves, and how to really be dedicated to God. And so right before we graduated senior year, we decided we were going to get, well, we decided we were going to get married junior year. And we decided that in senior year we'd get married. So we got married in the campus chapel just 3 weeks before graduation. Now, all of this
Oh
was in an
wow.
effort to save money because we had a discount because we were students. Now, this made no real sense because I like to say this only
I love
made
it.
sense in the 21-year-old brain because it wasn't, fully developed yet. So I'm
Right.
doing my finals and planning the wedding and it simultaneously.
Ugh,
So
yeah.
wild in my dorm, all from my dorm. It made no sense. So anyway, we did that and still had a beautiful wedding and started our lives together. We had 4 kids in 6 years, so it was a whirlwind in our
Mhm.
20s. I was primarily a stay-at-home mom. I did some working, here and there, like in the summers or seasonally. I was became a blogger, so I started blogging from home to just
Okay.
keep up my
Yeah.
writing skills, things like that. But when we God really blessed us too, like we were able to pursue that social justice work that we wanted to do in different degrees, him more fully. He ended up working at a charter school where they were able to get 100% of their graduating class into a 4-year college university. And this was the first time that
Oh
that had
wow.
been done for African American boys who had
Wow.
not been
Yeah.
in a selective high school. So that was the first time this had been done in the U.S. and he was really
Wow.
spearheading that work. So that was like amazing.
It's huge.
Bought
Yeah.
the house, we did some ministry stuff, we had the children, like we were like living the dream. But when he was 33, Kenneth started to experience some shortness of breath, and
Hmm.
so honestly, he had really been healthy. Like like rarely get sick, so we never really took it seriously. But when we went to the emergency room, eventually he's like, this is really bad. Like, I need to get to the hospital. I took him to the emergency room and they basically said, your husband has cardiomyopathy. His heart is not going to come back from this. He needs to get on a transplant list. He needs to get a defibrillator put in ASAP. And we're
Wow.
just in shock
Yeah.
because we're so
Completely changed your
young.
life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're like, we've never really been seriously sick. Like, this is really not like this.
Right. Right.
So hearing that news was really scary. He wore a defibrillator vest for a while, but he didn't want to get the defibrillator put in. He was really scared to do
Mm.
that. We found a second opinion from another cardiologist that worked with him and who did believe his heart could recover. So the second cardiologist worked with him on his diet, on weight loss, through a vegan diet. His ejection fraction number did go up. That's like the pump of the heart. So his heart did get better, get stronger. And the cardiologist actually believed that he would make a full recovery. So we were like really hopeful. We're like, okay, God is moving. This is great.
Mhm.
Maybe you can keep on without your defibrillator being put in. Let's see. So he was doing well, no signs or symptoms of cardiomyopathy. But in the fall of 2017, his grandmother passed away. She had been diagnosed with
Mm.
cancer. Everything happened really fast. So
Yeah.
early October, we got news that she passed away, and my husband just went into like heavy grief.
Oh.
So, like shoulder shaking, when somebody's like sobbing,
Yeah.
she was his grandmother, but she had really took a big part in raising them. She lived in the house with them when they were growing up. So, this is like the other mom for him.
Right.
Yeah. So, it was really hard.
Really impactful on him. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Like, blew him away, right? So he's
Oof.
going through all of this. I'm just like holding him and consoling him and encouraging him and trying to help him, work through it. The day of her funeral, he wanted to have everyone back at our house, his family like back at our house for a repast. So I helped him coordinate that. He sang, at the funeral. He spoke at the funeral. He seemed fine, it's like, health wise. But
Hmm.
later that night, he left the house to help his cousin. He's like, I'm going to take my cousin down the street to help him practice driving. He was a teenager that was learning how to drive. And while he was gone, the cousin called us and said he passed out. and
Oh,
then my
wow.
husband had passed out. So I just immediately knew that it was his heart. And we got to the hospital. They tried to resuscitate him. They were unsuccessful. Obviously, that day he died a sudden death.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, that was probably like a nightmare. You know, everything
Hmm.
is so surreal when things like that happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just surreal. It was
The
unreal.
sudden trauma of it. And then you're already dealing with grieving anyway because of the grandmother. And then, like, that compounding, like, yeah,
Yeah,
just unbelievable, I'm sure.
unbelievable, unbelievable.
Mm.
Having to tell the children, you know, it's just unbelievable, right? So
Yeah.
thankfully we had a lot of family and friends support. The church was supportive. His job work, they people were wonderful, like spectacular level of support. People all over the country. Really, we had known so many of the same people at this point because we were at the same high school, at the same college, at the same church. So now everyone you know, I know. So I mean, it was just
Right.
extreme, right? The level of
Yeah.
support. So I was really thankful for that. But obviously, I had to start again. I knew in my heart I had even at that time I had just got my master's, had just finished up a master's program in May, and now this is October. So I hadn't started working full time
Okay.
yet. I was looking for jobs. Prior to that, I worked part time, but I hadn't worked full time in at that point 13 years or so. So I was left with my children were 6, 8, 10, and 11 at that time, and I'm haven't worked full time in a long time. Got a house, got bills, got a car note, been living my life with Kenneth now. It was my late husband's name for 20 years. It had been 20 years since we first became friends. So, yeah, I had a lot of work to do personally. I would say what compounded the issue was the fact that when we were started this Bible study, we went to this Bible study in college. Although he grew up Baptist, I grew up Catholic. When we went to the Bible study in college, the students that started it actually were from a really, really like traditional, strict church. So we were kind of young. We're 18, 19. We're ignorant about it. So it's like a legalistic church, but we're like, let's give it a try. you know,
Yeah.
when you're in college, you're like,
You're
hey,
young. It's
let's
like,
see
whatever.
what,
Yeah,
let's
exactly.
see what happens. And, if we don't like it, we'll leave. And so we ended up going to this church and getting way more involved, I think, than initially thought we would have. And he was so favored in that environment and so promoted in this environment, although it was very, very legalistic. He wanted to stay. Like he felt like I'm
Mm.
singing, I'm preaching, I'm doing all the things.
Hmm.
Nevertheless, the emphasis between married couples was very much like wives submit to your husband, but not a biblical submission. It was almost like wives submit to your husband, just period. Whatever they want to
Yeah.
do, you go along with, and the marriage has
Yeah.
to really bow to the agenda or the desire of the husband. And
It's not a
so
very healthy relationship
it
necessarily.
wasn't balanced, right? It wasn't
Right.
balanced. So we love each other. We're friends. We're used to really being equals, but now we come
Hmm.
into this environment and our power balance becomes highly skewed, right? And so what happened in my life was the rules are all really surrounding the woman's life. So it's like women don't wear pants, women don't wear makeup, women don't wear jewelry. They frowned upon birth control. They thought that that was like a faith issue, that you should believe that God is gonna open and shut the womb, right? So I'm
Hmm.
having four
Hmm.
kids in 6 years, but not because I think this is a good idea, but kind of like I'm trying to be in alignment with the
A little peer
culture, the
pressure, social
expectations.
pressure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and a lot of it is also fear based, because it's like, well, you don't want to
Mm.
not please God, right? You want to make
Right.
sure that you're
Right.
pleasing God and that you're submitting to God's will. I'm like, well, I don't know the Bible like you guys do. Maybe I don't really understand. So our lives are really being impacted. My life even more so is probably, really being turned upside down, because the council is also like, women don't really work. Your children need you
Mm.
at home. So
Hmm.
things that I had planned to do and look forward to and had worked for, now I'm taking off of my plate, and I'm kind of shrinking down into this little box where
Mm.
I love my husband. He loves me. He's moving on with the plans that we discussed in high school and the dreams that we
Mm,
talked about. He's like kind of moving more in the fullness of that. But I'm taking this backseat role, and more of those things are becoming chipped away for me.
yeah.
So probably the late 20s, early 30s, I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like we tried it, it didn't work for me. I'm like, well, you know, and I literally
Yeah.
told him, like, I don't even feel a part of my own life. My life is about you and the
Mm,
kids. I'm not even a part of my life. I don't even know where I fit in this.
mhm.
So I think being a young couple, sometimes, especially too when we're young, there's a level of immaturity. I don't even think it was almost like he was shocked to hear this. And I didn't even really understand what was happening. I didn't, when you're young, you're like, what is even happening? I know I'm upset and this is
Right.
stressful, but I don't know how serious it is.
Right.
And so, yeah, we were hitting a point where it's like, this is serious. Like, we can't continue with this. So, early 30s, we leave the church, we start over again. But I realized, like, I'm really nervous now. Now I'm like, been in this bubble. I kind of been
Mm.
taught all these things. And now I'm really hesitant, about life, about decision making. Am I really hearing from
What's the
God?
right thing to do?
What's
Right.
the
Exactly.
right thing to
Exactly.
do? Do I really know?
Hmm.
Everything now is really hard for me. So I had only been out of that environment for a few years when my husband passed away. So not
Gotcha.
only am I starting over because he passed away, I'm really having to face the fact that I have to not find myself again, but create myself for the first time.
So true. I resonate with that in a strong
Okay.
way.
Wow.
Kind of similar backgrounds a little bit. I'm hearing your story. I'm like, wow, click, click, click. I kind of get a lot of that.
Wow.
And I think in any space, when you lose your spouse, you do have to find that new identity in a way. But I understand what you're saying about also finding that new identity as a woman, taking your place. Like, what is your role in life and whatnot? I get it. Yeah, big stuff.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what was your kind of next steps then?
Yeah, I would say that I had no idea. Like I said, when I've heard it said, we live life forward, but we understand it backwards. So when
Looking
he
back. Yeah.
passed away, looking back, I had to almost go back in retrospect, and my friend calls, like, I was kind of gaining this. I had to seek out this retro education. Like, what happened to me? Because I knew I was smart, right? I'm obviously intellectually highly, I have the capacity, I have a lot of education, I know a lot of people. I seem well adjusted, but when it came time to do things, I just always felt very terrified. And in reality, I had never stayed in a hotel by myself. I'd been with him so long, I had never rented a car by myself. I had never,
Yeah.
really
You
fully
guys grew
traveled.
up together,
We
right?
grew
You
up
were like,
together.
yeah, exactly. And you did it together, right?
Exactly. So a lot of my experiences were with him, in partnership with him. And so I'm
Hmm.
having to do everything for the first time by myself. I had lived zero adult life without him. And I first had to kind of take off some layers of shame. There was a lot of shame that I carried because I had allowed this to happen in my 20s, where I
Mm,
had come in alignment with this church teaching and then looked back and was like, oh, this was a big mistake. Why would I do this? This isn't making sense. And
mm,
so there was a lot of shame and embarrassment because of the level of catching up. I also feel like we're in this generation of like the boss woman, and be a
mm.
boss and be dominant and Miss Career Woman, and get your coins, and I didn't identify with any of that. I felt like, oh my
Right.
God, that's probably like the farthest thing from like my whole life is like about him and these kids. Like,
Yeah.
although, I had an education, I could write well, I could speak well, by all appearances, it's like, well, come on, just do it. But I just felt like,
You had a
what
lot
are
of
we doing?
personal work to do to build that capacity because you're right. You did have on paper, you had all of those things checked off, right? You had the ability to do it. But if you inside don't believe that and you don't have that self work done, it doesn't matter. There's nothing you can do, right? So you had to work to build that capacity to get to that space, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
those muscles were like,
Yeah.
they have like muscle
Atrophied.
atrophy, right?
Yeah.
Atrophy. I had muscle atrophy, like as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he, right? So like my
Mhm.
schema, the way I saw myself, the way I processed myself was nothing like that. So I had to really, really renew my mind. First of all, to know, hey, God wants me to take authority over my life. God wants me to be in the driver's seat. I've literally been in the passenger seat of my own life now for over a decade. So now it's like God wants you in the driver's seat. He wants you to take dominion. You have to take responsibility for yourself,
Mm.
who you are, who you're going to be, and all four of these children and every aspect of them. And that
Yeah.
was overwhelming, right? Like a lot of
Mhm.
the times I was either I had to deal with shame. Sometimes I just wanted to bury my head in the sand and act like this wasn't happening. I had to
Mhm.
drive around in the car. Sometimes I had to talk to myself and say, LaSandra, you know, I listen to Joyce Meyer a lot, and she talks about having a meeting with herself. So I was having a meeting with myself, like, LaSandra, Kenneth passed away. He's not coming back. You have to own that. You have to get a plan. This is like real. This is really real, and I had to kind of really, really internalize, and I could only do it almost like in small chunks. I couldn't,
Mhm.
they talk about you can't eat an elephant at one time. It was like I couldn't even digest it
Yeah.
all at one time. I was digesting
Yeah.
it just a little bit at a time,
A little bite, one bite at a time.
right? One bite at a time. God was really good to me, though. Interestingly, and I'll say this is where this spiritual aspect comes in. There was a friend of mine who, well, honestly, some months leading up to Kenneth passing away, I started having a desire to start a YouTube channel. He had bought me some props. We were trying to name the YouTube channel. We were trying to come up with this concept. It was like this little project we're working on. When he passed away, a friend of mine who was a YouTuber had done very well in the social media space. I just had a feeling. I just had a sense. I feel like they talk about God talks to you in a still small voice. I had a sense that I was supposed to look to her like a mentor and to take her advice. I even told someone else this. And it didn't seem like it made any sense because it wasn't like we were really close, but
Mhm.
someone sometimes how someone is highlighted to you in a way, and that was how it felt. If like this person's being highlighted to me and I should take her advice. She hadn't given me any, but I just felt in my heart like whatever she tells me, I'm gonna
You're being
take
led
heed.
to listen to her.
I felt
Right.
very led to listen to what she
Yeah.
said. So what I started doing was I was a good writer. I started just immediately sharing my grief process through writing on social media. This kind of came natural. I was a little nervous, but that was kind of how I was grieving, by sharing
Mhm.
some of what was happening, how I saw God moving,
Yeah.
how I was holding on to my faith even though it was really hard. I was writing stories about Kenneth and I and the love that we shared. And she
It was a
saw
way of
this.
processing your grief, right? I
Absolutely.
kind of did this. I did the same thing, which is like you and I like. I just like, oh my gosh, you're like my sister. I keep seeing myself in you, but yeah, I've always had like a love for writing, but I began to just journal basically, but in a
Yeah.
blog, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't really to anybody, but it was like it was a way to get these feelings and emotions out and to process what I was going through,
Absolutely.
and the impact was staggering to me. The response I had was really surprised because I mean, I wasn't doing it for anybody. It was just literally a way to get some of that out and to process a lot of these things. But it's amazing how God can use those moments of authenticity and vulnerability, right? I think people really resonate with that. So often all we put out on social media is the pretty parts, right? The everything's perfect and everything. And I know people talk
Mhm.
about this all the time, but what do people resonate with? It's when
Yeah.
it's the authenticity of the hard moments that we, by the way, all go through in some form or shape, right?
Yeah.
We all struggle. Like life is not easy for anybody. If it's easy right
Exactly.
now, it will come later, right? Like it's just, right. I mean, that is the truth of it. It sounds a
That's
little bit
so
like, oh,
true.
great, but that's the way we grow and can actually really develop character and whatnot too, right?
Yeah.
If we allow it. But yeah, so anyway, that's so interesting. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I know
No.
exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, no, you're
So
100% getting what I'm saying. Like that's exactly where I was at. And mind you, I kind of felt like a weirdo. I'm thinking to myself, like you said, I'm not sharing this for any feedback. I don't even know that anybody can relate to me. I feel like a weirdo because I just came out of this really, really religious church. So y'all probably don't know what I'm talking about. That was how I kind of was seeing it. But
Yeah.
it was, like you said, the complete opposite. The feedback was just like, LaSandra, this is profound. I'm in tears. I am so moved. This is resonating. It was just resonating with the masses. And I think it's because grief is really such a universal experience. Even if you don't
Yeah.
have my exact same details of my
Loss.
situation,
Right.
right? There's
Grief takes
something
many
that I'm,
shapes and forms.
yes, there's
Yes.
something here that you're going to be able to be touched by and feel that is relatable. So in
Yeah.
this moment, I'm really stepping into my rebirth. I don't know it yet, but what ends up happening is I'm about to find myself and find my calling, right? In probably my lowest point of life, right? Ever. When I just like, I look crazy right now, but whatever. And this person that God has highlighted and led me to listen to tells me, this is great. You need to keep writing. You also need to call this something. This needs to become something, that you have something here. And I think you should YouTube this in addition to writing.